I'm Jacob Halbrand, the editor of the National Interest magazine, and it is my pleasure today to host our webinar on clean energy and the Asia region. Today, we have a number of speakers whose accomplishments are so great that if I were to list their entire CVs, we would probably barely make it through this session. So I will give you an abbreviated version. We'll begin today with Paul Saunders, who is the president of the Energy Innovation Reform Project and a senior fellow in U.S. foreign policy at the Center for the National Interest. Many of you know that Paul has been associated with the center for several decades. Our other speakers include Michael Oslin, the Payson J. Treat Distinguished Research Fellow in Contemporary Asia at the Hoover Institution. Michael is an accomplished historian and has also worked at the American Enterprise Institute and as a professor at Yale University. We also have Douglas Hengel, a visiting senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund on global energy, climate, and resource challenges, who focuses on European energy security. He's also an adjunct faculty member at Johns Hopkins Sci School here in Washington, D.C. And then we have Yoonjung Lim joining us from South Korea. She is an associate professor at the Division of International Studies at Konju National University. She also serves as vice president for international affairs, dean of the Institute of Korean Education and Culture. And her specializations include international cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and energy, nuclear, and climate change of East Asian countries. Without further ado, I would like to turn to Paul, who will make an opening statement, a brief one, followed by our panelists. Then, once our panelists have spoken or while they're speaking, I encourage anyone in the audience to hit the question button at the bottom of your screen, and I will endeavor to pose as many of your questions as possible to our panelists. Paul, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Jacob, and thank you also to the Center for the National Interest for working together with us at EIRP to put together the session today. Very grateful for the collaboration. So one of the things that we've been at EIRP very interested in is what I think of as really a collision between energy, technology, geopolitics, and climate and efforts to address climate change in the international system. And I think certainly Russia's invasion of Ukraine has really, I think, highlighted for everyone globally the ways in which kind of energy and geopolitics can collide. But I think long before the war started and certainly continuing through the war, there's also this long-running and increasingly intense competition between the United States, China, and others surrounding energy and energy technology and what certainly some see as key energy technologies of the future. And the Indo-Pacific region is, for many reasons, is a central arena for that. Very large share of global population, large share of the global economy, large share of global economic growth. Obviously, kind of geographically, a region in between China and the United States, where America has a number of really important allies, and also perspective of global energy consumption, growth in energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, also a really key region. So this is an issue that we've been working on at Energy Innovation and Reform Project really for many years now, doing much of that work actually with support from the Korea Foundation and the Japan Foundation, which I certainly also would want to acknowledge today. It's been, I think, clear to anyone watching American foreign policy the extent to which the United States has really been orienting itself toward this region increasingly, for decades, but certainly especially over the last decade. Obviously, during the Obama administration, the so-called pivot, to Asia, later renamed rebalancing. The Trump administration, put its own stamp on that, and certainly accelerated many of the competitive aspects of the U.S. China relationship. The Biden administration, I think, has also really emphasized the region in many different ways, and certainly we saw already its Indo-Pacific strategy as kind of a core effort to frame that. I see energy and particularly clean energy as being really kind of at the center of this competition in many ways. First of all, I think we all increasingly realize as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the extent to which energy and energy security, first of all, are essential to modern civilization. And secondly, the extent to which they can't really be taken for granted. And the war and obviously sanctions and other aspects that affected global energy systems, this came in a context in which actually, the IEA, even before the war, stated publicly in its work that there, on one hand, had not really been enough investment in clean energy to get onto the pathway that many want to see there. But on the other hand, that there was inadequate investment in kind of fossil fuels, or, oil and natural gas, to ensure adequate supplies, and we've clearly seen the consequences of that, I think, in recent months. Now, we tried to address these issues at EIRP in a recent paper that looks at the Indo-Pacific region and approaches to creating kind of a framework that would help to promote energy and clean energy cooperation, among the United States and allies and key partners. One of my colleagues will put a link to that in the chat for people who are interested. There was a link that was distributed, but some people reported having trouble with that. The paper really focuses most heavily on U.S. cooperation with Australia, India, Japan, and South Korea, obviously 3 of them being very close U.S. allies in the region, and India being an increasingly close partner. I thought those 4 were important in part because, looking back at history, I thought the Bush administration actually in 2005, and in full disclosure, I was in the Bush administration working on some of these issues at the State Department. But I thought the Bush administration in 2005, when it was kind of stinging from the criticism that the administration received internationally after withdrawing from the Kyoto process, the administration launched this initiative called the Asia-Pacific Partnership on Clean Development and Climate that was an effort really to promote kind of cooperation around developing and deploying, new cleaner energy technologies. And the first countries that they went to were actually China, India, Japan, Australia, and South Korea. They were, and with the United States, of course, being 6 members. And I think at the time, they represented about half of the global economy. And the idea was that if you could really move these countries in the direction of clean energy, that it would make a real difference globally. Obviously today, much harder to continue cooperation like that with China in the current climate in our bilateral relationship, but I thought still a very kind of useful framework for thinking about how to do this. We've also done a lot of work at EIRP looking more narrowly at U.S., Japan, South Korea, trilateral cooperation on energy and energy technology. I think there's a lot in common there that the United States and Tokyo and Seoul, can do constructively. But this paper really focuses very heavily on the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific economic framework and specifically the clean energy dimension of that. The reason being that this is really a core administration initiative in the area. And for those who aren't familiar with the Indo-Pacific economic framework, this is a series of negotiations that the administration launched earlier this year. There are 13 other countries involved. I won't list all of them, but it does include, Australia, Japan, South Korea, India, 7 members of ASEAN, and a few others, and Canada is also currently expressing interest in joining. And I think one of the main objectives of the paper was really to point out what we saw as some of the and when I say we, I mean myself and my co-author on the paper, Amelia Gilchrist, who was here at EIRP at the time as a researcher, but has since moved on. I think we saw some kind of significant limitations in the administration's approach, and I'll just point to 3 and then stop and turn things back over to Jacob. One challenge, which a number of others have noted, is the lack of a really significant trade component to the IPEF, which is something that many of America's partners in the region really want to see, and particularly the developing countries that are participating in the negotiations. And some of the experts at CSIS have done some I think pretty good work explaining that, but it's something that's very important to make processes like this attractive to others. And we'd certainly like to see the administration take another look at that, and recognizing the very challenging politics domestically around that agenda, to think a little bit more creatively, perhaps looking at a narrow agreement that would just focus on clean energy technology, and look for ways to bring countries together around that. That would also, by the way, allow or establish kind of a framework to or another pathway, maybe I should say, to address just a variety of issues that have come up in many of our bilateral relationships. In the case of South Korea, there's an issue related to the Inflation Reduction Act, electric vehicle tax credits that's become very significant bilaterally. There's also some kind of challenges around solar panel tariffs and kind of Chinese efforts to export those through some ASEAN countries to evade U.S. tariffs. Second thing I would point to, a second limitation is really the scope of the so-called clean energy pillar in the agreement, which really focuses, rather narrowly on renewable energy, on methane, on carbon removal, and on energy efficiency. And, those are all worthy goals, but there are a variety of other ways to produce clean energy. Certainly in our view, it would be quite constructive to try to incorporate some of those into the clean economy pillar of the Indo-Pacific economic framework, and to be specific, nuclear energy, certainly natural gas, which is considerably cleaner than coal, which is, what many countries in Southeast Asia certainly are continuing to use, and actually with Chinese assistance to build. Then I guess the last thing I would say, and this draws a little bit on my reference just a second ago to China working with many of the countries in the region on energy projects, would certainly encourage the administration to think about, to some extent, reframing the IPEF really as a kind of a partnership between the developed and developing countries inside the group to try to expand in this area of energy and clean economies, to try to expand and promote the use of clean energy by helping those countries to develop the infrastructure and the power systems that they need to get there. And I think that an approach like that certainly could help the United States in this sort of multi-dimensional competition that we're engaged with. Engaged with China in pursuing. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry if I spoke too long. Thank you very much, and really would kind of welcome reactions from others and questions.
Paul, thank you for those cogent remarks. You covered a lot of ground, and I would like to turn to Doug Hengel for a brief response/statement. Doug?
Okay. Thank you, and thank you to the Center for the National Interest and the Energy Innovation Reform Project for inviting me to participate in this event this morning. Great report, Paul. You start in the introduction by talking about how the Indo-Pacific region will in many respects determine the success or failure of international efforts to build a global clean energy system. I think that's spot on. And the importance of the U.S. role as a leader, organizer, and facilitator. You talk about the dependence on coal in the region, and those numbers are always striking when you see them charted out. And that dependence is only going to diminish slowly under current trends. If you look at what the International Energy Agency has in its latest World Energy Outlook, its so-called current policies scenario, coal use is going to increase in several countries in the Indo-Pacific out to at least 2030, including India and Indonesia. So it's a huge problem. Unless we get coal under control, we're not going to have clean energy future. I thought your recommendations made a lot of sense. There's a lot of to realize the potential of the Indo-Pacific, clean energy pillar, and I can talk about any of those. I would like to make a couple of comments though about what I think that this Indo-Pacific economic framework is meant to do. So I think it's pretty clear it's supposed to be an alternative to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And, so this clean energy pillar, I think, should be viewed as a way to focus on the trade and investment issues related to clean energy. If you look at the ministerial statement from early September regarding this clean energy pillar, when the ministers met in Los Angeles, they talked about working together on enabling commerce within and across borders. They want to pursue initiatives that support infrastructure investment, enhance cooperation on high integrity carbon market development and operations in the region, among other things. So I think the idea here is try to, again, to promote trade and investment regimes, regulatory frameworks that support clean energy and the energy transition. So to the extent that we can focus here on those kinds of, nitty-gritty trade, investment, regulatory frameworks that would facilitate trade in clean energy, and some of your recommendations do that, I think that's where this framework can have the biggest impact. You mentioned the shortcomings, and I think you're right on that, but it's early days. So, and based on my conversations with some people in the government on this, so you note that the clean energy scope is constrained by focusing on the areas that you mentioned. My understanding is that it is possible to expand this to other clean energy areas. So things like, hydrogen, nuclear, carbon capture. Natural gas seems unlikely, and I'm happy to talk about that too, because natural gas is not considered necessarily clean by the Biden administration. You noted its limited appeal to participants. Maybe that's the case. I'd like to hear what they have to say about it. You recommend to explore a clean energy or a clean technology trade agreement. My understanding is that is possible under this framework, and I think that would be a good thing to do. There's a lot of reasons, as you mentioned, to pursue that, and my understanding is that the administration is open to this kind of effort. You also note that there has an uncertain future, that there's a tendency when administrations change to kind of things can be jettisoned, and so everything that was worked on doesn't quite go out the window. But I think it's possible, certainly if some good progress is made in this pillar over the next couple of years, there's no reason a future administration wouldn't keep it going. As you know, often what happens is you get these rebranding exercises. So something that the one administration did, you change the name, but you don't really change the substance, and it continues as the new initiative by the next team. So if we focus on getting some important things underway, I don't think there's any reason the next administration would just necessarily start afresh. Just a couple of words on natural gas. So when you introduced me, Jacob, I wear several hats. One of them is I work with a trade organization for the U.S. liquefied natural gas industry. So I think that's important to just lay that out there. And I think natural gas is an important part of what is going on in Asia. The countries out there want to use more natural gas as a way to reduce their consumption of coal. But the Biden administration has been a bit, let's say, schizophrenic in its approach to natural gas. But there have been, some statements where when we talk to other governments where natural gas is mentioned in a positive way. So I think that's an area where Japan and South Korea in particular could press that issue within the framework to try to get some traction on that one. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to dive in deeper on any of these issues.
Those remarks just prompted me to write down 5 questions. So I think our seminar is going well. I will forbear from posing them now to return to Professor Lim and what remarks she may have about the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, wonderful. Again, thank you very much for having me to this wonderful seminar. I truly enjoyed reading the report, again, which was very timely and important. Let me just briefly share my own observations on how these days South Korea's energy policy is going on, and how, and also I can probably briefly touch on the Japan's situation as well, because my specialty has been comparison again between the two countries. So first, again, as we all know, the new Yoon Suk-yeol administration came in early May, and a significant change was made in the energy policy. And one of the probably most important change was, again, the nuclear. As we all know, the previous government was more skeptical about the nuclear, but the new government, the Yoon Suk-yeol government, changed that approach, and now they are trying to increase the nuclear in the South Korea's energy portfolio, and not only just domestically. Of course, they'd love to, promote Korean reactor to the rest of the world too. And regarding coal, of course, we need to downsize, decrease, reduce the coal dependency. But these days, we do face another like a kind of domestic criticism regarding that policy or the policy direction, because coal power plants, as you can imagine, it does create many jobs. So the labor side is pretty concerned about those, job security issue. And anyhow, but still the coal, we definitely need to reduce the coal. So energy transition anyhow is the way we need to pursue. But the thing is, Paul already mentioned the Russia's its invasion to Ukraine. This war changed many things, and then energy price went up very, very dramatically. So for the country like Korea, which is very, very heavily dependent on imported fossil fuel, it was a huge, again, damage. So these days, KEPCO, Korean Electricity Utility, their deficit issue is getting more and more attention from the society. Their deficit is already pretty huge, but with this increased energy price, how financially their sustainability is really one of the pretty big concern of the whole country. And I went to the Japan last week actually, and I did have several chances to talk about this energy situations with the Japanese colleagues. And it looks like they, of course, they share the similar concern. And it looks like they also very much interested in cooperation in this field, the energy field. The thing is, let me just get my water first. The thing is, Japan and Korea, of course, we have the historical issues, but just putting those, historical disputes aside, the thing is, Korea, Japan, we are both resource poor. We are both dependent on imported fossil fuel, which means, again, that we have, of course, common concerns, but at the same time, we cannot be that complementary, or in the field of nuclear, or in the field of renewable energy, or even energy efficiency technology. Korea and Japan are more competing now. So that's another like a probable reality we need to deal with. But as long as the two countries now want to have more cooperative relation, I think we both, again, Korea, Japan, need to expand our cooperative relationship to other regional members. So in that sense, again, I appreciate Paul's that report, which was about the IPEF, IPEF, which is very important framework, I also do think. But the only thing I need to mention about the IPEF is, again, the members of the IPEF. So for Korea and Japan-like countries, again, resource poor, heavily dependent on imports of raw material, we definitely need to diversify our sources of imported raw material. And China's presence is huge when we manufacture solar panel and the battery too. So how can we really escape, or how can we reduce those China dependence on China is really key challenge for both, again, the South Korea and Japan. So regarding that issue, I'd like to actually ask Paul or other presenter which country should be really included. We definitely probably need to be expanded. So in that sense, I was glad to hear that Paul mentioned, Canada recently showed its interest in joining us because, again, Canada is also very natural resource rich country. I think as a like-minded partner countries as well, I think Canada's participation will be highly appreciated too. So my last comment, I'm terribly sorry about this weird voice, but my last comment is minilateralism is these days more kind of trendy topic in the among the IR scholar in South Korea. So we probably need to try many different type of minilateral approach, including, again, Quad, or including, again, IPEF. So issue by issue, probably we need to design different frameworks. Again, I'm very sorry about my voice. Thank you for having me again.
No, that was very well done. And I wasn't going to mention it, but Professor Lim has contracted COVID, as she alluded, and is making a stalwart appearance on our behalf. Thank you again. Now we turn to Michael Osland, longtime friend of mine, and one of, if not the most perceptive observers of this region from America. Michael, your thoughts?
Oh, Jacob, thank you. Now with that buildup, the pressure's intense. I think my voice will be worse than Professor Lim's, but I'll do my best. I'm also the non-energy person here, so I I think I could maybe usefully and briefly play two roles. One is to talk a little bit more broadly about the geopolitical implications of the report and what we're doing, but then also from the political and geopolitical perspective, maybe a little bit be the skunk at the garden party and raise some concerns that I think would come up from the more secular policy side of the fence, if I could put it that way. From geopolitics, I think it's important, first of all, the report, which is excellently written and very comprehensive, and particularly the key partner country sections, which goes deeply into each of the key countries, I think is really important for American policymakers to read overall, largely because it is so easy for the strategic concerns, and we've already mentioned Ukraine, obviously Taiwan as a key worry now for American policymakers, ongoing a decade now of worrying about the South China Sea. Those security concerns so easily and consistently can overrun the more general discussions that we can have about partnership on energy, partnership on renewables and sustainability, that the types of reminders that this report represents, for example, really need to be integrated into our larger geopolitical discussions, because obviously, I mean, it's almost, redundant to have to say it, energy security is national security. And energy partnerships, such as the kind that the report hints at and talks about, is also national security. We base everything on these ideas of the alliances we have, on new iterations of partnerships such as Quad or AUKUS, and energy issues, geopolitical energy issues that can upend the economies on which the larger global economy so intimately depends, are themselves inherently at the core of geopolitics. So first of all, I commend the report, but secondly, I think that this provides a way that we can more broadly talk about how to integrate, as we used to do in the old days with nuclear weapons, how do you integrate the concepts of energy security into geopolitics at every stage of our conceptualization, which means the positive elements, right? How do you build partnerships, which the report talks about, and also the negative elements. How do we defend or prepare or think about defending against things that could be so disruptive that they would then themselves take on a life of their own and essentially bring up, I would say, bring up short policymakers who aren't very well versed in this. So one quick example, though it's not directly related to what we're talking about, but if you remember back in 2010 or so, when China for a period cut off the export of critical earths and those raw materials, the minerals that are needed at the core of all industrial processes to Japan, the rare earths. All of a sudden, for a brief period of 2 or 3 weeks, people who had never heard of it suddenly realized that this, if it were implemented as a weapon of war, could bring down the Japanese economy. And we had absolutely no preparation and no answers for it. Now, bring that more broadly to the question of shipping lanes for energy, for, as Professor Lim said, Korea, but also Japan, which is 95% dependent on energy imports, as much as they have tried to use nuclear, of course, but since 2011, they are down to a fraction, about 10% of where they were before the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. Solar and wind have not played the role that Japan has hoped. And of course, for them, coal is also entirely imported, so it plays a smaller role. All of this, again, for a vulnerable country like Japan, just in this instance, immediately is at the core of national security, much more, to be quite frank, and somewhat provocatively, much more than questions of far-flung islands, small islands that may be contested between Japan and China, or even between Japan and Korea, honestly. These are the questions that really sit at the heart of national security. So what then are some of the problems that I would see with the report, again, from the sort of secular political side? One of them is that to depend on clean energy has to take into account what the consumer and the citizen is willing to bear in terms of costs. Meaning, if it is less efficient, if it is more expensive, that is going to be a political constraint on any type of development that governments may wish to undertake, let alone things like cutting the emissions with the with the Kyoto Agreement, and all of the countries have made fairly significant commitments to cutting their greenhouse emissions. In our country, we see problems in California, we see problems in Texas with the unreliability of clean power grids, and of course the lack of investment into traditional legacy power systems. So far, those are scattered, and certainly in a country like America, which is so big, you can have local failures, although the California failures are pretty big and they affect a pretty large part of the American population. But in smaller countries, in Taiwan, in Korea, even in Japan, these could have far more significant effects just because of the geographic limitations, concentration, and the fact that you have so much concentration of population in in a very small number of cities, Tokyo, Seoul, Taipei, and the like. So what is the market literally willing to bear? Then secondly, of course, the question of, which is related to this, and I think of this again from the security and geopolitical perspective, nefarious acts against a not particularly resilient clean power sector, right? Let's say Japan is able really to shift. I mean, it's been importing enormous amounts of LNG and other energy, of course, since 2011. Let's just say in the case of a contingency, this is not a country that has an enormous number of ports, meaning a lot of resiliency. Its sea lanes can fairly easily be interdicted, at least on the continental facing side, by China. Even the United States, which has a forward-based presence, would be hard-pressed in the case of a crisis to be able to live up to all of its commitments, including protecting Japan's energy sea lanes in conjunction with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces. The point I'm trying to make is that you could see that a country, now Japan inherently, of course, because it's just dependent on energy coming in, but you could see a country that has committed to clean energy in a way that is less resilient than some of the traditional legacy energy systems, being completely at risk in the case of a war, an outbreak, a clash that spins out of control. And again, this would be factored into the level of risk that countries are willing to accept. And you look at a country like Taiwan, far more at risk of all of this, far more vulnerable to disruptions all across the board. So I think that is a problem. And then just finally, to wrap up, a third problem, an interesting one. I don't mean it as much as a problem as sort of a question, is this issue of next generation technologies. Whether we're talking smart grids, of course, we just had the announcement in the U.S. this week about some type of fusion being done. I see thumbs up coming from folks like Doug, who knows much more about it than I do. How then do we get our partners who have less capacity and capability than we do to invest in next generation issues, to become fully on board with being part of it? I think there should be some very innovative diplomatic initiatives and thinking about how we would bring, a country like Japan is, let's say, a little bit higher up on the scale just because of the size of the population, the level of national wealth than other countries. But how do we bring all of them together to make sure that we don't stagnate? I mean, we're already challenged by China on an enormous number of issues, including chips and AI and quantum and things like this. But if we're talking about ensuring at the very most basic level that people can turn on their lights, can warm their homes, can get to where they need to go, I think I don't hear the folks talking about the diplomatic relations really saying, look, how do we make sure that we have instituted durable or enduring partnerships to actually be looking at these next generation technologies? What's the investment we have to do? What type of students do we need? What type of labs do we need? Is it universities? Is it government-sponsored research institutes? Pardon me, I don't have COVID, but I still have a failing voice. Those are some of the things I think we need to think about, because all too easily, I think it can sort of break down, and of course, this is right what the report is trying to get at, it can all too easily break down to where countries feel that they're sort of on their own in this, even within a global market for buying and selling energy, but they're on their own for trying to figure out what the next generation is for themselves. And if that happens, then it's all too easy that people will just say, look, we have to just go back to legacy. It's known, it's proven, and it's tested. And then all the efforts that we're trying to get towards clean energy sort of fall by the wayside. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
That was quite a trenchant response, Michael. I think several of our panelists are more than eager to take you on or to amplify your remarks. I would like a brief response. We'll begin with Paul, but please keep it brief so that we can get something from our other panelists as well. Is Paul there? Oops.
Thank you to everyone for all of the kind of comments, points, and feedback, which, you know, honestly, I think I overwhelmingly agree with. Maybe starting with Michael, because I think this is kind of a central point. You know, I think the energy transition is going to go considerably slower than its advocates hope for. And there are a variety of reasons for that. But Michael, I think you put your finger on a number of them. And certainly one is cost. There are also questions around kind of grid reliability. You know, I would personally make some important distinctions between what has happened in California and what happened in Texas. We don't need to get into that in this setting, but I think the causes were kind of different in those two situations, and I think what happened in California is sort of more in line with the critique you were making, and what happened in Texas is a little different. But you know, certainly the cost issues are really central. These energy security questions are really central. I would say, you know, in the environment of the Russia-Ukraine war, you know, coming back to natural gas, and we were kind of talking about natural gas is really expensive right now. So many of the solutions, you know, that rely on natural gas, whether it's switching gas in place of coal, or using gas to make hydrogen, you know, those things are not very attractive right now. We can hope that would change in the future, but it sure isn't going to change actually without more investment. And if that investment comes only from state energy companies in authoritarian countries, and it doesn't come from you know, investors in the United States and allied countries that are supporting international energy companies, you know, to do that work, then there are going to be some important implications to that that I think we all have to think about. Anyhow, I'll stop there. Jacob encouraged brevity. I'm sorry to go on.
Well, no. I just want everyone to get a chance to make some remarks. I wanted to turn to Doug next, and I think my question flows from Paul's remarks. Doug, you talked about a transition, and I had put the word a question mark next to the word even before Paul spoke. What kind of a transition do you think is in fact occurring? And if it is occurring, how rapidly?
So one can question whether there's a transition going on or just an addition where we're adding wind and solar and other things on top of the current stack of fuels. Dan Jurgen talks about that. So if we're going to have a real transition, we have to not only have all of the increased demand from around the world taken care of by clean energy sources, but we also need to start reducing the amount of coal and natural gas and oil that we use. So I think there's a transition going underway, but it's going to be slow and difficult. I want to make a point about this next generation technology that Michael raised. I mean, obviously we need a lot of this, and fusion, you know, despite that breakthrough, it's going to be a while. But there's, you know, hydrogen is sort of the flavor of the month at the moment. Nuclear has to be back on the agenda, including small modular reactors. We need all of these things. There is a lot going on in terms of partnerships internationally on this. We also have very long-standing cooperation with Japan on a whole range of clean energy technologies. I'm less certain what we have going on with South Korea, but there is a lot of that, and we're going to need all of it going forward.
I had a specific question for Professor Lim, which occurred to me. You know, we talk about Korea, but of course there's South Korea and there's North Korea. We haven't really, how much of a factor is North Korea in all of this? I'm curious about that.
Oh my God, thank you. Thank you for asking a wonderful question, because these days in Korea, I have presented and wrote about this issue. Again, the North and South green detente. Is it possible or not, that kind of, you know, issue? Because as we can guess, North Korea's energy situation really they are basically for power generation. They're basically dependent on hydro. And of course, coal is secondarily important, but their core consumption has been rising over the couple of years. Because probably, you know, because of all this international sanctions, you know, their exports has been limited. So probably they, insteadly they use the coal to generate their own power. And another thing probably I need to mention is, of course, all this, you know, energy price rising will be, of course, another kind of challenge, challenge to the North Korea as well. But the thing is, you know, as we all know, after the Russia invaded Ukraine, you know, North Korea, they very explicitly supports Russia's position. So, you know, Russia's probably kind of support with some energy can be expected, I think. So that's another like a probably interesting trend. We need to, how would you say, the trend change we need to keep watching on. So having said that, anyhow, North Korea as a how would you say, they are trying to promote themselves as a normal country to the rest of the world. So they keep working on energy transition issue as well. Actually, they published the voluntary national report to UN, and they promoted. They are also working on sustainable development, energy transition, and those kind of issues as well. So if South Korea or some other countries who are willing to, if we can suggest those kind of, you know, energy related cooperation. Of course, here we need to think about the sanction issue as well. But anyhow, if we can proactively suggest something regarding this issue, again, their energy transition or sustainable development, I think it can be an interesting suggestion for them as well. So again, the sanction is a big hurdle. So we need to probably find out a niche between the sanctions and then the green detente mood. Did I answer your question?
Yes, that's actually, it's quite intriguing. In fact, I wasn't aware of that, and I doubt that most of our listeners were either. Let me follow on with a question to Michael, who called himself the skunk at the party, but in fact threw a somewhat of a bombshell with his query. I want to follow up, Michael. You were talking about, I guess, the primacy of national security, or the energy is obviously a component of it. Do you feel that the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has turned into a debacle, driven up oil prices around the world, but also harmed the Russian economy, do you think that this would make China, which is reliant on oil imports, more hesitant at this point to embark upon the sort of adventurism that would be implied in an attack, a direct military attack on Taiwan?
I'd say hard question. We only have a few minutes. I think there's a lot of issues that go into, a Chinese calculation of whether and when to attack Taiwan. In terms of its energy vulnerability, obviously it has tried over the past decade or so to ensure that it would not be solely vulnerable to maritime transportation routes, so that it could have land transportation routes, mostly from Russia, of course, where the big energy agreements are, but also from some of the stands and trying to diversify so that it reduces its level of vulnerability. I think part of the answer is the degree to which Beijing would assess how far the U.S. and primarily the U.S. would be willing to go to cripple it from an energy perspective in the case of an invasion of Taiwan, meaning, this is where escalation becomes very difficult and challenging because you can talk about localizing the effect of a war over Taiwan to Taiwan and trying not to have it spill over onto the continent, and that would include American missile attacks, let's say, on Chinese bases. But energy could be the same thing. Whereas if the U.S. decides then to horizontally expand the war to where we're interdicting or shutting down energy transportation or energy pipelines for China, then that's a direct threat to the homeland versus, you're just fighting over Taiwan. So then what is the next escalatory level against the United States? And we have a very vulnerable power grid. Everyone knows that. It would not take much to shut down large swaths of our electricity and our water and the like. We've wasted decades in not hardening it and not getting redundant systems. Should that really terrible crisis come, we may find that there's going to be a revolution here when people say, what have you been doing for decades to protect us? And the answer is really nothing. So China will have to think about, how far it wants to go up that scale. But to wind it up, I would just say that in a weakening macroeconomic environment for China, any disruptive activities or any activities that further disrupt global energy markets, macroeconomic conditions, global trade and the like, therefore weakening the economy at home and leading to further unhappiness at home, would be factored in, I think, to any calculations the Chinese have that say that maybe this is not such a great idea right now.
Michael, thank you. I would like to thank all of our panelists for their remarks. We are ending promptly at 10 a.m. as we promised, and as we always do at both the Energy Innovation Reform Project and the Center for the National Interest. I'm glad that we were able to collaborate on this Zoom webinar, and I hope that all of you found it as illuminating as I did. And it will go up on the National Interest website and will be up on YouTube if you have any desire to look at any of the comments again. Thank you. And with that, I would like to conclude this session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.